you can play with these powdered pigments. These are just sort of the pigments that exist in charcoal, graphite. These are sanguine and sepia powders, but they don't have a binder. So you can sort of lay them down as soft sort of dust kind of on the surface. They can go on really gently, which means they also erase really gently. But another thing that can be really lovely to do with these, and this is charcoal powder, is you can mix them with a little bit of water. And depending on how much water that you put in there, you can mix something that looks like sort of a tempera paint and carries the material onto the paper. Or you can get something that's mostly water, with just a little bit of the powder in it, that looks like an ink or a watercolor almost. And it's kind of funny stuff. It doesn't always want to mix with the water immediately. You kind of have to work it for a while. I'm kind of still mixing on this one. Finally, eventually it's just like, fine, I'll mix. Which is kind of where we're getting now. But what's really kind of neat about it is it is the material that you know and love, but you're able to apply it now like a paint or like an ink. Depending on how much water you mix with it. You can have different tonalities, light to dark. You could mix these powders together to also sort of warm things up. And we'll come back to this, but the water just acts as a carrier. So once it dries, these marks that you leave behind with the powdered pigments are totally erasable. You can lift them all the way up, just like you lift up a regular pencil line. So you can have a pencil drawing that looks like it's dripping, or splashing, or washing around like Roland Flexner's kind of interesting bubble drawings. And then you can start bringing back traditional graphite and charcoal, the kind of materials you have a lot of control over, and make these drawings that have like familiar characteristics, but then do things that weren't possible with the media before. Does that make sense? So you'll want to let this dry for at least 15 minutes. The reason why is A, erasers don't like to get wet, but B, the paper gets really vulnerable when it's wet. It tends to want to tear or pull, so you just want to wait until the paper has dried too. But then we can come back and erase. Right now, you can erase right away with the dry pigments. And what's just really cool is they can go on very dark, but they lift, because you haven't applied them with any pressure, they lift right back to white of paper really fast and easily. So that can be interesting. These powdered pigments are also really great for experimental processes, because you could either turn them into washes that then you could put in a spray bottle or put on a sponge, or who knows, or that powdered pigment has a tendency to, you can kind of apply it to lots of different surfaces to make things draw that don't usually draw as well. Does that make sense? So here, these are sort of our fancy traditional drawing media. If you like the idea of just working with powdered pigments, another option is chalkline chalk that you can buy just at any old hardware store. They have primary, secondary colors of these, and then really fun fluorescent colors. These are for sort of marking out kind of electrical lines and stuff by contractors or sort of planning. But am I get you to squeeze. That seems dangerous. Oh, I guess I didn't open that one. But it's, you can see it's a similar sort of texture. So these can just, lots of different purposes for these powdered pigments. All right, the next thing I'm going to show you is these are just real wide variety of India ink. You've probably used some kind of ink before, but inks are another material that can do a really nice job of, they can help make almost anything into a drawing media if you want to. They're very liquid, but they dry permanent. They also, what makes them liquid is water, so you can dilute them further with water, which is nice. So you can sort of play with them in a saturated way. You can also play with adding water to them. They're liquid and will drip to start, but as you make them more liquid, you can really start sort of getting them to travel in new directions on the page. And again, you could sort of fill different devices with sort of pigmented water. You could play with adding it to different sort of solutions. Options are kind of endless there. I just sort of pulled out a whole bunch so you could sort of try and play with it. And when they go on without any water, they're pretty opaque. But you can also make kind of lovely gradients or sort of mix them together to have your own colors and palettes, either in saturation or with adding water to them. So that's another thing to play with. I have lots of pipettes in little containers to sort of play with those. This is a just piece of Canson Edition or paper we've been using all the time. But you could also use these kind of inks on some of our synthetic papers, which I have over here. So I pulled for you both Mylar, which we used for our portrait transfers, which is a synthetic polyester paper. It's like a film that has a little bit of a chemical applied to it that makes it sort of translucent and cloudy. It also gives a texture, so it takes dry media nicely on either side, and you can work on front to back. And then this is Yupo. Yupo is also a polyester synthetic paper. It's very smooth. It's sold mostly as a watercolor paper, but it doesn't absorb any watercolor paint, so the watercolors and inks sit kind of uniquely on it. And another material that people just love to use these synthetic papers with are these Pinata alcohol inks. So the liquid in our India ink is water. In the Pinata alcohol ink, it's alcohol. So it is like rubbing alcohol, essentially. A very mild acetone, I guess is what you could think of it as. And it, because it's an alcohol base, it's going to dry very, very quickly, much quicker than water. And especially on these synthetic papers, our Pinata inks sit in a very kind of liquid and also dry in a very liquid sort of way. So I'm just sort of squeezing a few different colors around. And you can see how these play on top of each other. You can also, I guess that doesn't do much. You can apply them with a brush, or a lot of times people just use the tips or little pipettes. They're hard on brushes because they dry so fast and they dry quite plastic. So I put out some cheap brushes to try. But you can also sort of destabilize them using another kind of alcohol, which is they call it the cleanup solution. And it can really, as you sort of pull it over, the shapes that you make, you can use it really well to sort of move the inks around, change how they behave, kind of unsettle the surface. The Mylar is really nice because it's transparent or translucent, so you can play a lot with sort of having different inks on the front than you do on the back. Jacquard, the company that makes the Pinata ink, also makes a color extender, which can create some different effects. The Pinata inks behave one way on the synthetic paper and a very different way on the traditional paper, so it's something you'll want to play with kind of in combination, just trying different things. Our Mylar, if you want to use larger sheets of it, I think I put at least one sheet in your kit, but there's also a drawer mark Mylar where we have, I think, 30 by 40 inch sheets that you could use. The Yupo synthetic paper is on this roll here, so you can help yourself. And clearly, it's one of our larger rolls of paper, so you could end up working really quite large with it if you're interested. That's also a good time for me to bring up that we do have rolls of most of the paper that I have on the drawers. So this is the Canson edition right here, which is the paper we use most in this class. Beside it, the one that's a little shorter, is a traditional watercolor paper, so that would take a lot of wet media if you're interested, and you can work up with that large. I also have smaller sheets of that in our drawers. I have rolls of the Mylar, so you can work very large with it there. But really, this gets to be the unit where you sort of try anything that you can find in the room and not in it. Does that make sense?